Hi, everyone. This is Marc Zawel. I'm the co-founder of AcceptU. Excited to be here today to present to you our webinar and our presentation on the 5 keys to gaining admission. I'll just start the presentation by mentioning that there is a copy of this presentation available for download from our website, and you'll see on your screen if you just go to learnmore.acceptu.com/5keys, you'll be able to download this presentation. And then also mention that all those that are attending today's webinar, viewing the webinar even in the future, are welcome to contact us here at AcceptU to schedule a complimentary admissions assessment with one of our former MBA admissions officers. This is a good opportunity to get some feedback on your candidacy, as well as your strengths, weaknesses, recommendations for improving your application. And all the counselors here at AcceptU are former MBA admissions officers from top 25 programs. Just to give you some additional background on AcceptU, as I mentioned, we're a counseling group based in Boston, comprised entirely of former MBA admissions officers from top 25 programs. We work with our clients virtually, so by phone, Skype, and email, and we've helped now literally hundreds of applicants gain, we feel, a competitive advantage in the process, placing them into the business schools of their choice. To give you some additional background on myself, as well as my co-founder here at AcceptU, my background is in admissions. I'm the author of an admissions guidebook called Untangling the Ivy League. I went to Cornell for my undergrad. I have an MBA from UNC Chapel Hill. My colleague, Stephen Friedfeld, also undergraduate at Cornell, master's at Columbia, and a PhD from Rice. And with our team here, we have counselors now from most of the top 10 and top 15 business schools in the US, including Columbia, Cornell, Penn, Stanford, UNC. We feel that because these counselors have worked inside of admissions offices, they're in a unique position to provide applicants with real inside knowledge on how they can best differentiate themselves and improve their chances of getting accepted. So today, we're going to talk about the 5 keys to gaining admission. And what we've tried to do here is give you a better sense as an applicant of what admissions officers are really looking for. And we're trying to be cognizant also of the time of year, recognizing that there's an opportunity to be proactive in your planning. If you are just beginning the admissions process, if you've been planning for it for the last couple of months, now's a really good time to get a jump on the process. And in our experience, what we've found is that the earlier that applicants begin planning for the process, the more successful they are. The stronger their application materials, the better opportunity there is for them to demonstrate interest, which is going to be the first topic that we discuss today, but also just taking away a lot of the stress associated with the process and just allowing applicants to put their best foot forward in this highly competitive admissions climate that we're all operating in. So let's start just by giving you a sense of what are admissions officers really looking for, and then we're going to get into these 5 keys. I want you to be thinking about, excuse me, first, academic qualifications. They are the most important criterion that admissions officers are going to be evaluating in your application. By academic qualifications, I mean GMAT as well as GPA. Your GMAT score is set. Your GMAT score isn't going to change. It is what it is. Now, your GPA is going to be looked at through a different lens, in that your GPA is not just your GPA. Admissions officers have to consider what university you've attended, what degree or what major you concentrated in, the rigor of the coursework that you took while a student there. So a 3.5 from a large public university is going to be very different than a 3.5 from a smaller arts college, from an institute of technology, from an Ivy League university. And so you have to kind of take into consideration that your GPA is not just your GPA. With that said, academic qualifications are really just one piece of the admissions puzzle, and you have to recognize that applicants to top business schools, they typically have very strong academic qualifications. If they didn't, they likely wouldn't be applying to these types of programs. So there still are many more academically qualified applicants than there are spots, and admissions officers, in addition, are trying to build diverse and well-rounded classes. And diversity can take many forms, and we'll talk a bit about diversity a little bit later in this presentation, but thinking about not just, say, socioeconomic or ethnic diversity, but also diversity with respect to career interests. You can't have an entire class comprised of students that are interested in management consulting or finance. There needs to be some sort of diversity with respect to what students are interested in studying and going into. Knowing all of this, you have to be thinking about admissions officers placing more emphasis on the qualitative pieces of your application. Your academic qualifications, like I've said, are only going to get you so far, and they are the most important piece. But if you know that most applicants are going to have similar or stronger academic qualifications, then really it's through these more qualitative pieces of your application, in particular your essays, letters of recommendation, your resume, your interview if you're conducting one. These are the ways that you're going to be able to communicate more directly with the admissions office. This is the way that you're going to be able to show them why you have a particular interest in their program, what makes you different, and ultimately this is what's going to be what helps you get into these types of programs over other similarly or more academically qualified applicants. So that's kind of a background of that kind of, I hope, frames the presentation and the conversation that we'll be having today. I want to now go and start working through some of these keys that we feel are critical to differentiation and really standing out in this process. And we'll start with what's called demonstrated interest. And I'm sure some of you have heard of this, perhaps some of you have not, but either way, it's a really important first topic and key for us to discuss. So for those of you that are not familiar, demonstrated interest is what we call an X factor in the admissions review process. Bottom line, and in the simplest terms, admissions officers want to admit applicants that, if admitted, they feel are more likely to attend. And they want to do this for several reasons. First of all, yield, which is the percentage of admitted applicants who opt to enroll at that university, is typically used in many of the business schools' rankings as a criterion. So admissions officers want to admit applicants that they feel are more likely to attend so that they have a higher yield, so that it more positively impacts their rank. They also want to admit applicants that are really excited about the program. They don't want to admit applicants who are likely to enroll elsewhere. They don't want to admit applicants that perhaps are using their program as a safer school if they are, in the event that they are not accepted to another school. Finally, there's a lot of uncertainty associated with admissions, especially in this type of climate where there's been a lot of fluctuation between one year to the next with application volume. So admissions offices use models to better estimate what their yield is going to look like year over year and how they'll hit the target number of incoming students. But when there's a lot of uncertainty, it becomes harder to do so, which means if they can, in turn, admit applicants that they feel more confidently are going to attend if they are admitted, it takes some of that uncertainty out of the equation and they're more likely to admit that applicant. So knowing all of this, you want to express your interest in your top choice programs as early as possible in this admissions process. The best way for you to do so is by visiting. When you visit, you want to go on an official visit, you want to do an official tour. You don't want to just visit perhaps a friend of yours who's a classmate or excuse me, like an old coworker of yours who is now a classmate. You want to go through the official channels to register as an interested applicant and an interested student. While you're there, try to go on a tour. You can sit in on a class. Some schools will let you even eat in the dining hall. You want to experience all of that. You can also attend an MBA fair, which tend to run in the late summer and the fall. They travel both around the US as well as around the world. And you can meet with admissions officers at hotels or at other events that bring admissions officers in connection with applicants who perhaps cannot make it to campus. Some schools actually also host regional admissions office events, and you certainly, if there's an event that's being held in your hometown, want to make every effort to go and attend that. Finally, you can talk to current students. This is great if while you're visiting campus, you have an opportunity to sit down with some current students who are perhaps in the same career concentration as you are interested in pursuing. You can also speak with professors. Summer is a good opportunity for you to do so, and that there typically is a little bit quieter in terms of their teaching responsibilities. You can also connect with members of career services. Again, this is all about you learning more about their program, why it's a good fit, but it's also about you showing that you are going above and beyond what most applicants are doing to best demonstrate interest in their particular business school. You want to note all these points of contact. You want to try to recall the points of contact that you're having. You want to follow up if you meet an admissions officer. It's always nice to send either an email or even a handwritten note saying how nice it was to meet that individual, how much your conversation perhaps reaffirmed your interest in their particular business school. You're trying to start to build a relationship with the admissions office. We're going to talk a bit about this later on in the presentation about likability and how important that is in helping you get admitted to these types of highly selective business schools. But the relationship with admissions officers is really important. And if you're meeting with admissions officers who are perhaps traveling or on the road, admissions officers that are traveling typically travel to those areas where they also are responsible for reviewing applications. So you might be meeting with the specific admissions officer who's going to, in the fall, be reviewing your application. So that's why building this relationship is really critical, especially at an early stage. Thinking also about how all this demonstration of interest is going to allow you to draw upon that in your essays. Most applicants, when they write their essays, and we're going to talk a little bit about essays later on in this presentation, they say, well, in reviewing your website, I see that there are some classes or there's a couple of activities that or clubs that I'd be interested in joining or perhaps leading. But it's much more powerful to say, in my conversation with this current student, or when I was on campus and I sat down for a few minutes with this professor, or having discussed my career ambitions with a member of career services, I feel that this school is right for me. That's so much more powerful in making the case and in standing out from other applicants. So be sure to be keeping all of this in mind. I know that some of you who are listening today and who may be listening to this as a recording are not going to have an opportunity to visit campus. And this is not going to be held against you if this is not something that you can do. Now, with that said, if you live in New York, for example, and you do not visit NYU or you do not visit Columbia and then you apply there, then that may be held against you. Why didn't you take the time, given that you live in the same place as the business school, to go and visit? But if you live outside of the US, there is not an expectation that you are going to fly to the US and you're going to visit these schools. If you can, then that's great. I think that it will certainly be beneficial. But if you can't, for whatever reason, that's not something that ultimately is going to be held against you. If you aren't going to be able to visit, there are ways to demonstrate interest virtually. So you can contact the admissions office by email or by phone with questions. You want to make sure that the questions are actually questions that need answering. You're not just calling to ask questions to ask questions. You can also get in touch with local alumni. Many of the top business schools have alumni organizations or associations that are regional, both here in the US as well as abroad. Perhaps there are events that they're hosting for prospective students. You can also, as as if you could while on campus, connect with current students. You can reach out to leaders of clubs that would be of particular interest to you. Some of the top business schools have ambassador programs where they have selected students to communicate with prospective students. You can also similarly reach out to faculty or career services by email. You can set up a phone call or Skype. As with the on-campus demonstration of interest, when you're doing this virtually, you want to go through these official channels in your outreach so that it can be tracked by the admissions office, and you want to keep notes of your outreach in order to recall this type of outreach in your application essays. So we've talked a bit about demonstrated interest. I want to move on to the essays, and in particular, effective essays, because we feel here at AcceptU, based on our experience working inside of admissions offices at these top business schools, that after the grades and GMAT, really it is the essays that are driving the decision. So that's why we feel that effective essays really are the second key to gaining admission. And we'll talk a bit about this today. We will be hosting more in-depth webinars, both through Beat the GMAT as well as independently, specifically on essay writing. So be sure to stay in the loop, either on our mailing list or through Beat the GMAT, in order to join us for our webinar specifically on effective essay writing. But I wanted to provide a little bit of high-level guidance and strategy on the essays. Let's think a bit first about why essays are really important. Admissions officers, as we've discussed, they want to learn more about you and your background. Your academic qualifications are simply giving them insight into your academic performance, and there certainly is a need for you to be academically qualified in order to handle the rigor of the core curriculums as well as the subsequent elective coursework that you're going to be taking at a top business school. But it is more than that. You also want to keep in mind that while there are many business schools that still do require interviews, there have been some that are kind of shifting in a different direction. And so the essays will then ultimately become really your only way to lend a voice to your application in order to really stand out from other applicants that have very similar academic qualifications, or even those that maybe have very similar career experiences. You want to have that way of building the connection with an admissions officer through really compelling writing that gives them a better sense of your voice, which is another reason why the essays are important. The admissions officers, if you think about them, they're reviewing hundreds and in some cases thousands of applications a year. So at a certain point, you can only look at so many transcripts and you can only look at so many GMAT scores. You want to feel like you're admitting applicants that you feel a real connection with. And you want to put yourself almost in their shoes, and you want to sympathize and empathize with them, and you want to be excited for them. And that's really the only way that you can do so and communicate that is through a voice in your essays. Strong writing is also a really critical skill for more generally business, but also thinking about analysis, communication, thoughtfulness. This essay or these essays, in most cases, they need to be reflective of the importance of strong writing and strong communication skills. We've talked a bunch already about how essays can move you from being just an academically qualified applicant to an admitted applicant. And the essays in conjunction with the other more qualitative pieces of the application really are your way to do so. And then finally, the essays can help you address weaknesses or extenuating circumstances that you really have no other opportunity to address. For example, perhaps you have a low or lower GPA because of maybe maybe you were overcoming an illness while you were in college. Maybe you had some personal issues that you had to attend to with your family. Whatever the reason, you need to communicate this to an admissions officer in an essay. Because if you don't explain, say, a low GPA, they'll just simply draw their own conclusions. They'll say, well, this is a student that perhaps just wasn't focused, or maybe this was a student that was not really mature, or maybe this was a student that just didn't spend much time studying, whatever it is. But if that's not the case, you need to own your story and you need to tell your story, because really only you are going to tell your story in the most compelling way, in the most favorable way. And if you leave certain parts out of your story and of your essays, admissions officers will draw their own conclusions. And I can tell you that the conclusions will not be very supportive of your overall application versus if you're telling it yourself. Here's some high-level guidance. As I mentioned before, we're going to be focusing specifically on essays in the coming months, and I would encourage you to either sign up for our mailing list or stay in the loop with Beat the GMAT in order to register for those webinars specifically on essay writing. But at a high level, we wanted to provide some guidance just to knowing that the effective essays are really a critical piece to your overall application. You want to be as direct as possible in your essays. You want to, if you think about it, these essays are really an exercise in your ability to find examples that are most impactful. You have to think about all of the things that you have done, either professionally or personally, and which in particular you are going to highlight. So try to cut to the chase and give a lot of thought to how you're going to identify which examples you feel are going to be most compelling and powerful. You'll also want to explain and be very honest and candid about why you want an MBA, what you're going to bring to a class that perhaps other applicants cannot, and then probably most importantly, how business school plus your prior work experience is going to help you achieve your goals. Because admissions officers are assessing your short-term and your long-term goals and trying to get a sense of whether they are realistic, given your prior work experience as well as the resources that are going to be available to you on campus. And if your goals are not realistic nor attainable, and they have doubts about that, it can be really, it can be very difficult to overcome that in your application. Thinking also about redundancy. You don't want to spend or waste time in your essay setting up the situation. You don't want to be talking about colleagues or coworkers or supervisors. You want to be talking about you and just you. I mean, you might need a little bit of background in order to frame, say, a challenge that you faced and overcame, but the focus of these essays needs to be on you. And you don't want to use examples that can be found in other parts of your application. If you know that you're going to be highlighting certain accomplishments or leadership, say in letters of recommendation or in your resume, that's not also a topic that you should be discussing in your essays. You have such limited space in order to really communicate this story to admissions officers that if you are not taking full advantage of every opportunity to talk about a different side to you, that's really a wasted opportunity. Finally, I'm sorry, not finally, but we have two more kind of points on the essay. You need to be engaging. We talked about the importance of writing and strong writing as a communication in business, but these essays don't need to be business case studies. They need to be somewhat engaging and fun and exciting and making admissions officers want to actually read on. I mean, if you were an admissions officer and you had read, I don't know, 25 essays on why applicants wanted to come to your business school, and you got to number 26 and it kind of opened in the exact same way as all the other essays, and it really didn't communicate much beyond what the other essays have done, your eyes kind of glaze over. So you need to add some life. You want to have an opening that's really engaging. You want to use quotations. You want to mix up the style and the structure, adding in things like parenthetical comments or descriptive terms. You want to make your essays fun to read, so that admissions officers want to read it, and so that admissions officers read your essays and say, wow, that was a great essay. That was really unlike the other essays that I've read today or this week or this month or this year. You also can really add a lot of life to your essays by utilizing vivid examples. And we try to encourage our clients here at AcceptU to mix in both personal as well as professional. There tends to be an overemphasis of professional experiences and examples that are used. You are applying to business school. You do want to talk about professionally what you've been able to achieve. But you also need to be thinking about other applicants that are also talking about their professional accomplishments, really your personal, your backstory, who you are. It's kind of a way for you to be really unique because you are you and no one else is going to be like you. But someone else and likely another applicant or applicants have a very similar career path and the current position as you do. So it also allows admissions officers to feel like a connection with you. If they know about who you are and some kind of personal understanding of you, there's more of an opportunity for them to build a connection than if you just are talking about how you work on, in finance or how you work in marketing. There's just not as much of a way to build that type of connection. And of course, you want to remember to cite your points of contact with the program, all that demonstrated interest. Let's move on now to likability, because this is kind of it's a term that's thrown around a lot, but I'm going to try to put some meaning behind it and definition behind it, and hopefully give you some advice on how you can be likable in your applications, because it is, we felt, the third key to gaining admission. So I want you to put yourself in the shoes of an admissions officer and think about reviewing, like I said, tens or hundreds or even thousands of applications. And you want to feel a connection with the applicants, and especially with the applicants that you are recommending be admitted to your program. So admissions officers, they like to admit nice or likable applicants, applicants that are coming across as likable in their application materials. Now, what does that mean? What does likability mean, and how do you come across as likable? So as I talked about earlier with the essays, you want to highlight some of your personal qualities. I feel that admissions officers are going to have more of a connection to the personal experiences that you've had versus perhaps your professional. Like I've said, there needs to be a balance between personal and professional, but definitely bring some of those personal stories to life, especially if those personal stories are aligned with your longer term career and academic interests. What I mean by that is if you're interested in clean tech or sustainability, but you also love to go hiking or camping, then that's a great way to pull this all together, because then I see not just professionally that you're interested in this particular career track, but personally you can back it up with how you are engaged in your hobbies or your extracurricular activities or interests. You want to have an appropriate tone or voice in your essays. You want to come across as not someone, you want to come across as someone who is very confident but not overconfident. You want to come across as someone who is successful and who has achievement but isn't bragging. So there's definitely a fine line with the tone or voice that you have in your essays. You want to make sure that that tone is appropriate in building that type of connection with admissions officers. It's probably the most important point, is just being authentic and real. If you try to become someone that you're not in your application essays, it's so easy to see through that. And there's nothing worse than a phony or a fake in admissions. You want to be someone who's real and tangible, because you're being assessed and evaluated on a piece of paper. So if you're coming across in your essays or in the other parts of your application as inauthentic, it's just a real, I feel, turnoff to admissions officers. And then finally, thinking about who can vouch for you. And this goes back into that first point that we discussed today, demonstrated interest. If you have had conversations with current students and you can cite those conversations in your essays, I think that starts to build the relationship and the connection that admissions officers have with you. Meaning, if you said something along the lines of in your essays, in my conversation with this current student, and then you actually name that current student, and you feel that in that conversation that you had with that student, you really understood better why this school is a good match, then the admissions officers say, like, well, this is a student who not just demonstrated interest, but who we feel like since they were communicating with this current student and we know this current student, and it can sort of, through that relationship, help admissions officers sense that connection that you have with their program. Also want to be thinking about your imperfections. I know that when we discuss this with our clients here at AcceptU, there's can oftentimes be some pushback where applicants or clients are telling us, hey, I don't want to talk about what I do bad, I want to talk about what I do good. But it's about, if you can show imperfections, you can show mistakes, you can show challenges, it makes you much more human. And we feel that that human element is really important in the applications, and in particular in the essays, and it highlights things like that are discussed on this slide: humility, honesty, vulnerability, willingness to grow and change and mature, introspection. These are really important qualities that admissions officers like to see in applicants, and a really good way for you to do that is by talking about some of your imperfections. It also just makes you more real. And we said authenticity is really critical. If you make mistakes, we all make mistakes, and if you're willing to admit to those mistakes, then this is another way for admissions officers to see that you are more authentic than perhaps other applicants. Let's go on to the next slide. This is along the same lines of likability, but we're going to focus a little bit more on focus, because likability is also thinking about how business schools are not really admitting well-rounded students. And we've had clients in the past who have said things like, well, I don't have any community service. Is that going to be held against me? Of course not. You have to think about business schools building well-rounded classes, not necessarily admitting well-rounded students. Well-rounded students are great, but most classes are comprised of focused students that in sum, as a class, are well-rounded. So knowing this, you want to fill yourself or fill a niche for yourself within the class. And you take a step back and just stereotype yourself. Think about who you are, where you're coming from, what your career interests are, where you conducted your undergraduate education, what role are you going to play in this class. Understand all this, think about all of this, and then try to position yourself around who you are. Now, if you're coming from an overrepresented area, and overrepresented can mean career interests, it can mean geography, it can mean many things, then perhaps the positioning is going to need to be a little bit different in terms of your focus and in terms of coming across as really likable and compelling in your application. And so the positioning in your application can be very different than what you ultimately end up pursuing. How you position yourself in an application is focused on admissions. It's focused on what can you do in order to get admitted. Now, what you ultimately do when you've been accepted to that business school, once you've arrived at that business school, once you've enrolled at that business school, you can do whatever you'd like to do. You're not going to be held to it, but you want to think about your positioning perhaps differently than what your real interests are, but you need to remember, come across as authentic. So you're not going to say that you have an interest in an area that you don't have any way to back up that interest. The focus is important also because when it comes to likability, admissions officers know that business school really is your opportunity to utilize the resources and the support that are available to you in order to achieve your goals, not really find yourself and figure out what you want to do with your life. So knowing that, you have to really be focused on why this opportunity is something that you need to pursue right now, why this business school is the school that you feel is going to be most helpful in attaining those goals. And then finally, why you're different and what you can bring to the table that perhaps other applicants cannot. The next key is leadership, and it's not just leadership, but it's also leadership potential. And let's talk a bit about leadership in business school today, and from an applicant's point of view, what you can do to highlight your leadership that you have. Leadership is I mean, for lack of a better term, big business in MBA education today. There are many of the top business schools that are strongly emphasizing and highlighting their leadership development programs. Perhaps it's one of the reasons that you're applying to business school. You would not be alone if it was. Admissions officers want to identify current leaders. They also want to identify potential leaders. If you are a leader today, then that's great. It's something that can certainly be beneficial to you in the application and in the review process. You need to be very upfront and honest about the leadership capacity that you've attained. You also want to be careful about the tone in which you're discussing these leadership accomplishments. You don't want to be boasting about them. There's definitely a fine line there of being very upfront and candid about what you've been able to achieve, but not going so far overboard that you come across as in a not really great way to an admissions officer that's reviewing your application. If you aren't a leader today, that's also okay. Or if you haven't been able to perhaps achieve the full extent of your leadership potential. Because leadership isn't necessarily about what you've done, it can be about what you've been able to achieve with the help of others. And that's a really good way of, I wouldn't say spinning, but positioning your application and your leadership if you don't feel like you've had the opportunity to really become a leader. You also can be thinking about what others have been able to achieve because of you. Leadership is not necessarily just managing others, and that's a common misconception among applicants, is that they feel that leadership is managing others, and leadership can be managing others, but it's not exclusive to managing others. What qualities are representative of a leader? You want to consider both personal and professional leadership. As we discussed earlier, you want to try to highlight your personal qualities that are going to allow you to better build a connection with admissions officers and also allow you to stand out from other applicants that have similar either career experiences or educational experiences. So you can think about leadership outside of the work environment, whether it's through extracurricular activities, whether it's through something that's happening at home with a spouse or with a significant other or with children or with your parents. There's a lot of opportunity to talk about leadership outside of the workforce, outside of your career, if you don't have it, or in addition to the leadership work that you've done within your career. Be thinking about how you work with others, how you've been able to set a vision, how you've achieved results. Mentoring others, that's always an area that we like to encourage, the mentorship of others, because if you think about business school, a lot of that is mentorship of second years with first years, perhaps within the first year study group, you're on the older side in terms of age and you have someone in your study group who's fresh out of college. Is there a way for you to mentor that student in a way that helps them? Listening to others. Listening is another really important quality that admissions officers like to see in applicants. Motivating others. Compromise, that's another area that is a quality that admissions officers like to see. Perhaps there have been some difficult times either at work or at home where you've been able to boost morale. It's pretty difficult, if you look at all of these questions, to not be able to say yes to at least one of them, in which case you are a leader. So every applicant can be a leader. It really just comes down to strategic positioning and thinking about how you can highlight those areas that do demonstrate leadership. But you always also want to remember, and this is a little caveat at the end, leadership skills can always improve. We've said here it can likely improve, but everyone's leadership can improve further. And that perhaps is a reason why you want to pursue and earn your MBA, is to better your leadership capacity. The last key that we're going to talk about today, and then we'll take Q&A, is programmatic fit, program fit. And that's the last of the 5 keys that we feel are essential to gaining admission. So fit is when you make it clear that an MBA program will help you achieve your goals, which when you say it sounds pretty obvious, but it's something that most applicants don't think too strongly of when putting together their application materials. But fit is critical for several reasons. First of all, as we discussed a little bit earlier, admissions officers want to admit applicants that fit with their program. They also want to admit applicants that have realistic expectations about what they'll be able to achieve. If you're looking to change your career, which many, if not most of most applicants to business school are looking to do, but the career change cannot be justified if you say that you're interested in going into finance, but you can't really provide strong justification as to why you're interested in finance or what you've done in order to better explore this career interest. How do I know that you'll be able to go into finance? And how do I know that you're really serious about that type of career change? So admissions officers are assessing whether your goals are realistic. And they also are assessing whether they have the programmatic resources to help you attain those goals. If you want to go into a certain area like entrepreneurship and start your own business, but you're applying to business schools that really don't have strengths or programs in support of that, then that fit isn't there. And it's likely that you're not going to be able to achieve your goals. And it's likely that admissions officers aren't going to want to have you there. If you have unreasonable expectations, or the programs are misaligned with your career interests, you're going to be unhappy. And admissions officers and business school deans and professors, they don't like unhappy students because it impacts their ranking, it impacts their future alumni giving. And business schools are businesses and students are customers, and they want to have satisfied customers that are good for their brand, that help evangelize for their brand, that give back and contribute. So they're trying to assess all of this in evaluating your application. So you want to only apply to those schools that have the right programmatic fit. We talked a little bit earlier about positioning yourself about what you're interested in versus what you ultimately end up doing, and how there can be a little bit of wiggle room there. But fit is hard to fake. If you try to push too hard in too much of a different direction than what can be justified given your prior work experience or your hobbies or your interests, it can become across as inauthentic, and it can be detrimental to your application. But you do have some time. If you're planning for this process far enough in advance, then you can do things in order to build a fit with an MBA program, to demonstrate that this school is a good fit for you. To fit, I want you also to be thinking about the questions, these three questions, and we've talked a little bit about them previously, but the importance of why you want to pursue an MBA, why do you want to pursue an MBA now from a particular program, what makes you different, what you will contribute. These questions, whether they're asked directly of you in the essays or indirectly, where you're just discussing them in an essay or perhaps in an interview, they really do form the basis of your story around fit, and you want to pay particular attention to that second question about particular program. Admissions officers, they do like to see a fit with their school, and within the, say, top 25 business schools, they all vary. They do have certain strengths and there is a fair amount of overlap, but they also are all different. And so you're not going to just be able to talk about your fit with one school and say that, use that essay in another school's application about your fit with that program, swapping out a few words and talking about how this class or this professor is different than this class or professor that is in another application that you've submitted. So it is the particular program that is probably the most important question when you're thinking about fit. And you want to finally just be considering your career goals, your personal preferences. Why is this a good fit for you? Career goals are one thing. If the school has this particular strength in an academic area like consulting or finance, you can certainly highlight that, but also consider location. If you want to be on the East Coast, in the Midwest, or on the West Coast, in the Southeastern part of the US, how does that impact your ability to attain your goals? If you're interested in finance, then you want to likely be going to business school in an area that has a very strong financial community in terms of being able to attain a job upon graduation. So just be thinking about those personal preferences as well. And then finally, fit ties back into the very first key that we talked about today, and that's demonstrated interest. What steps have you taken to validate that this school is the right fit? And if you can visit, if you can do something either virtually or face to face on campus, it's going to make your case as to why this school is a good fit all the more powerful. So with that, I always think it's important at the end of a presentation to take a step back and say, what did we actually learn today and what did we cover? So we started by thinking about what admissions officers are really looking for in applicants beyond academic qualifications. And then we spent a bit of time with each of these 5 keys: demonstrated interest, effective essays, likability, leadership potential, program fit. And with that said, I'm sure that there are some questions, and we've got a bit of time left. So I want to make sure that I'm able to address as many of those questions as possible. I'll just reiterate that if you are interested in downloading this presentation, you can do so from the AcceptU website. The address is on your screen, learnmore.acceptu.com/5keys. And all of our webinar attendees, whether it's today while we're running this live or in the future with a recorded session, you are more than welcome to contact us for a complimentary admissions assessment with one of AcceptU's former MBA admissions officers. So with that said, I'm going to hopefully be able to answer some of your questions, and we can take it from there. So the first question that came in that I'm seeing is it okay to inquire over email from the admissions office portraying one's overall profile about the competitiveness of one's candidacy to a particular program even before applying? Hey, I like that question. I think that you can have candid, and admissions officers are open to having these types of candid conversations about where you are. You might want to discuss with an admissions officer the number of years of work experience that you have. You may want to discuss with an admissions officer where your GMAT score is, especially if your GMAT score is on the low side, especially if your GMAT score is not reflective of your analytical and quantitative skills. So I think that they're more than open to having these types of conversations. If you're concerned about confidentiality or privacy, then you can, I think, have those. You can have those in confidence, those conversations, and say, "I'm an applicant. Here's kind of very briefly my background and my profile information. What do you think? Would you recommend that I apply this year? Would you recommend that I wait? If you recommend that I wait, what would you recommend that I do in the interim?" But you can also be open, and you don't necessarily need to mask who you are. Because if you talk to an admissions officer and he or she says, well, hey, it would be really beneficial if you raised your GMAT score 20 or 30 points, and then you do that, that's showing something. That's showing that you're listening to what they're recommending. And then they're also, I think that it's showing that you are as committed as you say that you are to the goal of gaining admission to their program. Second question, does the relevance of GPA to admissions officers fade with increasing number of years of professional experience for a candidate? For example, someone with 10 plus years of experience with a GPA be as critical as part of the application? The short answer to that question is no. It would not be as critical a part of your application if you have more work experience for a couple of reasons. First, admissions officers are trying to take what you've done most recently as a good indicator of what you will be doing while you're in the program and what you'll be doing in the immediate future. So if you were in college, say 10 plus years ago, that probably isn't a good indicator of how you'll perform in a business school setting today. With that said, what will kind of start to play up a little bit more is, well, it's a balance. You could say that your GMAT score will be used to compensate for the lack of, for the amount of time in between where you are today and when you pursued your undergraduate studies. But also with applicants that have this 8 to 10 years of work experience, there tends to be a little bit less emphasis on even their GMAT score and much more on their work experience. But I would say for those of you that have like 10 plus years of work experience, you should be considering also executive programs as opposed to full-time programs. Because if you're applying to a full-time program with 10 years of work experience, admissions officers are going to have a whole slew of other questions that they're going to want you to answer as to why you've waited until this time to pursue an MBA, and also why you're looking at a full-time program versus an executive program given the amount of work experience that you have. The next question here is, how do MBA admissions officers view military veterans? Are they at a disadvantage compared to peers who have civilian business experience, or are they looked more highly upon? I wouldn't say that they're at a disadvantage, and I wouldn't say that they're looked more highly upon. I mean, I think ultimately it's how you're portraying your experiences. Definitely with military experience, you want to talk about things like leadership. You want to talk about your accomplishments in the same way that you would be talking about these types of experiences if you had been in the corporate setting. I would also love to see with military vets how they've kind of come to terms with what they're interested in pursuing. So I wouldn't say that you're at a disadvantage. I wouldn't say that you're necessarily at an advantage. I do know that there are some business schools that are looking more favorably at military vets as applicants. So you can do that research or have conversations perhaps with the admissions office or those that have gone through the process to get a better sense of what those schools look like. But I would say at the end of the day, your experience is going to be looked at similarly as the experience of others, and it's going to come down to the positioning of that experience. The next question is, how personal can you go in portraying the personal aspects in essays? Does it always have to tie in some way to business, professional aspects in order for them to be impactful? Well, the first part of that question is there is definitely a line that should not be crossed when you're talking about personal issues in your essays. Things like, well, you have to be careful, relationships, politics, health. Um, you're trying to give these admissions officers insight into who you are, but you're not trying to give them so much insight that they learn about all of the perhaps family challenges that you face. You have to be careful there. It is good to see it tie into the professional aspirations. I know that I discussed that a little bit earlier in this presentation. So I do think that when you're talking about your personal qualities or hobbies or interests, it can be more powerful to have them tie into your career interests. But if you can't and they're still powerful and they're showing a side of you that admissions officers are not seeing otherwise, then I would not hold back on utilizing them. Let's get to the next question here. There's a question about, for reapplicants, will past essays be reviewed again? If so, what's a good strategy in writing new ones? You have to look at that on a school by school basis. The admissions offices will let you know when you need to either, through the reapplication process, either submit a brand new set of essays or just an update essay. If you're submitting the latter, just an update essay, you have to show progress from last year's application to this year's application. There needs to be progress with, if you had low academic qualifications, with an increased GMAT score, if you didn't have strong quantitative or analytical skills, whether you've taken additional coursework, if perhaps you did not have enough work experience that you've been able to advance your career further. Contact the schools, ask them what the policies are for reapplicants. Make sure that if you're doing the essay with the update that you're really talking about how things have progressed over the last 12 months. The next question here is about the selection process and thinking about formulas that are weighting GPA and GMAT and essays. Not a set formula that's used across all business schools. I think that admissions offices, though, are weighting similar criteria when you're thinking about, say, academic qualifications versus the essays versus letters of recommendation or the resume or the interview. Certainly the academic qualifications are the most important criterion, but also considering that for older applicants, there's perhaps not as much weight. So there's not a science to all of this, and admissions at top business schools and applications are reviewed holistically. So they really do look at the entire package in consideration. And that's how the decision is made, is by looking at the entire package, which means that if you have a deficiency in certain part of your application, there is an opportunity to highlight a strength in another and to overcome that weakness that potentially can be pulling you downward. Here's another question. There's been talk of a trend of admission toward younger applicants, 26 or 27 years old and younger. What can those between 29 to 32 demonstrate to compete effectively with those in the younger bracket? Well, you have to talk about what can you bring to the table that these younger applicants cannot. And additional work experience can be very beneficial. You're going to be able to talk about perhaps challenges that you face that younger applicants cannot, both personally as well as professionally. I talked earlier in the presentation about mentorship. Like all of these, you're trying to take where you are. You're not going to be able to change your age and show what could potentially be seen as a negative in a much more positive way. So be thinking about, okay, additional experience, what does that actually mean in terms of the qualities and the skills that you're going to be able to bring to a business school that perhaps applicants that have only 2 years or 3 years of experience that are a little bit younger, perhaps don't have the same level of maturity or experience or accomplishment, and then try to highlight that. Here's another question that came in about, do you have any advice on how to describe a circumstance without making it sound like an excuse? Well, you need to be careful. You want to be honest and candid. Like, for example, let's take one of the most common optional essays that are written among applicants, and that's about a lower GMAT score or a lower GPA. Now, if you have to think about why you have either a lower GMAT score or a lower GPA. If you have a low GMAT score, and the reason that you have a low GMAT score is that you're not a strong test taker, then you can be very honest and candid about that. Similarly, if you have a low GPA, but the reason that you have a low GPA is that you decided to switch majors after your first year because you were studying an area that you realized you had no interest in and you were never able to pull up your GPA subsequently. Or perhaps you had some very serious family or health issues that you had to overcome. Then be honest and candid. But if the reasons are a little bit less justifiable, then you have to be careful. You want to be candid and open, but you don't probably want to be as revealing. If the reason that you have a low GPA is that you just were lazy or you didn't feel like going to class, then that's going to be a very difficult essay to write, because there's a balance between being honest and candid about it and not revealing too much that you come across in a negative way. So that's about the time that we have for the presentation this afternoon. Thank you all for joining. My name is Marc Zawel. This was the 5 keys to gaining admission from AcceptU in conjunction with our partners at Beat the GMAT. Be sure to visit our website for additional information on AcceptU and our admissions counseling, and you can join our mailing list if you're interested in receiving updates on future webinar topics, or you can visit Beat the GMAT, and we look forward to seeing you at future webinar events. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.